So today, we're diving into something really interesting. We're exploring a source that takes a unique look at the evil spirits mentioned by name in the Bible. It's not just about some vague concept of evil, it's about mapping out their specific roles and missions in what it calls a spiritual war.
And let me just start by asking you this. What if fear wasn't just an emotion you feel? Or what if pride wasn't just a character flaw? The material we're digging into today makes a bold claim that these aren't just abstract ideas, but specific spiritual entities with a real purpose.
So here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll set the stage, defining this idea of an unseen battlefield. Then, we'll get into the specifics, looking at 3 categories of spirits the source identifies: deception, affliction, and corruption. And we're going to wrap it all up with what the source calls the final word on the matter, a declared victory.
All right, first up, the unseen battlefield. Before we can talk about any specific spirits, we have to understand the core idea that our source is built on, and that's this concept of an ongoing, very real spiritual conflict.
And here is the key takeaway from this source. It argues that the Bible isn't talking about some generic, shadowy evil. No, it's pointing to a hierarchy of specific spiritual beings, each with a name, a job to do, and a strategy. Getting this distinction is going to be crucial for everything else we talk about. So, let's jump into our first category. This group is all about messing with our heads. We're talking about spirits that are designed to attack our very perception of what is real and what is true.
You see, their entire mission, as this material lays it out, is to warp the truth. They don't just tell a lie here or there. They work to create entire environments where lies feel true and the actual truth starts to feel, well, wrong or even hateful. It's all about causing mass confusion.
And the source points to some really clear examples from Scripture. You've got the lying spirit that actually deceived prophets, a perverse spirit that could twist a whole nation's morality, and a seducing spirit that's all about pulling people away from their faith with ideas that sound really good but are actually false.
Now, what's really fascinating here is the difference in scale. The source shows how the perverse spirit works on this huge societal level. Its goal is to flip an entire culture's moral compass upside down. But then you have the lying spirit, which is super personal. It works on a micro level, crafting deceptions that literally sound like your own thoughts. Okay, so we've talked about spirits that deceive the mind. Now we're shifting gears to those that are said to afflict the body and the soul. This category is all about personal torment, oppression, and that feeling of being weighed down. The source describes the work of these spirits as being deeply, deeply personal. They show up as this crushing spiritual weight, a sense of being totally paralyzed, or even as chronic physical sickness. Sometimes it's that feeling of being hopelessly trapped in a cycle you just can't break.
And here are the key players in this category, according to the source. You've got the spirit of fear that just freezes you in your tracks, the spirit of infirmity that can cause long-term sickness, and even a spirit of lethargy that can just lull people into a kind of spiritual sleep.
This is such a great illustration of the conflict. The spirit of fear, the source says, whispers these lies based on feeling abandoned and vulnerable. But the biblical counter isn't just be brave, it's love. Specifically, understanding God's perfect love, which is said to completely dismantle the foundation that fear is built on.
Wow, this timeline from Luke 13 is such a powerful example. For 18 long years, this woman was bound by a spirit of infirmity. Think about that. But the source points out the incredible contrast. Nearly 2 decades of suffering ended in a single moment, with a single word from Jesus. It just perfectly highlights his immediate authority over even the most long-standing affliction.
Okay, our third and final category of these dark spirits gets into the relational and moral stuff. These are the spirits that work to corrupt our character from the inside out and poison our relationships.
Yeah, their whole goal is to poison the will. They encourage these toxic internal attitudes like pride and jealousy that just destroy relationships, break apart families and communities, and ultimately lead people's hearts away from God.
And the examples here are they're corrosive. You've got the spirit of jealousy, which the source connects to the very first murder in the Bible. The spirit of discord, which loves to sow division. And then there's the spirit of haughtiness, which is tied to the original fall from grace itself. The source really focuses in on this famous verse. It says that this haughty spirit is the exact same thing that poisoned Lucifer. It was that prideful desire to be like God that led to his own destruction. It's presented as this ultimate self-obsession that always leads to a fall. So after outlining all of these destructive forces,
The source makes a huge pivot. It doesn't leave us in the problem. It moves to what it presents as the ultimate solution, the final word on this entire conflict.
And this is such a critical transition. The point of explaining all these spirits isn't to write a horror story. It's actually the setup for a story of incredible triumph. The problem has been laid out, and now we get to turn to the resolution.
This verse right here is presented as the central declaration of victory. The source interprets the cross not just as forgiveness for sins, but as a decisive military victory. It was the moment where every single one of these spirits and authorities were publicly stripped of their power and totally defeated. And here's the kicker. This isn't framed as some dusty historical event that happened 2,000 years ago. The source material argues that this victory is an ongoing, accessible reality that believers can actually live and operate in today. So how do you make this victory practical? The source points to these 2 steps from the book of Revelation. First, it's about relying completely on what Christ already did on the cross. That's the blood of the Lamb. And second, it's about personally agreeing with and declaring that victory for yourself. That's the word of your testimony.
And just to drive home how complete this victory is, the source highlights this verse from Luke. The key word, the whole point, is all. Not authority over some of the enemy's power or most of it, but over all of it. No exceptions.
So we end right back where we started, with a question. We've laid out the source's entire framework, a spiritual battlefield, specific enemies, and a final declared victory. So the last thing it leaves us with is this. If the victory is already won, the only question left is, how are you going to respond to that reality?